Thank Jensen and Ball Stars for their generous support of this series. Global Goals is meant to contextualize the concept of sports and diplomacy, and tonight's panel will be centered around the power that sports and athletes have to use their voice to make an impact on global and local communities. We will feature the perspectives of a scholar whose work centers on the nexus of race, identity, and sports, an executive director of a local nonprofit here in KC who uses sports as a tool for mentoring and empowering refugee youth, and the perspective of an athlete who has harnessed their voice for social change. Again, we thank you so much for taking your time out of your evening to engage with this topic. We are recording this evening, so after this, tomorrow you'll be getting a link if you'd like to revisit any of the content in this or share it with anybody in your network. We very much invite you to do that. And we hope you join us for the last discussion of the Global Goals series next week here in Kansas City. We'll be back in person, so if you're local here in the community, we'd love to see you there. I'll speak a little bit more in detail about what is to come with that program at the end of the program tonight. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our moderator for this evening. Dr. Lindsay Krasnoff is a globally recognized sports diplomacy expert specializing in Franco-United States relations through sports. She's the author of Basketball Empire, France, and the Making of a Global NBA and WNPA, and The Making of Les Bleus, Sport in France, 1958 to 2010. She currently serves as an adjunct instructor of global sports at New York University. She is also a former historian for the Office of the Historian at the United States Department of State. Dr. Krasnoff holds BA from George Washington University, MA from NYU, PhD from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. And we thank you so much for leading us through this discussion tonight. Thank you so much, and please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan. And thank you to the International Relations Council of Kansas City, to our honored speakers this evening, and to our audience for joining us this evening. I'm really looking forward to a wonderful, vibrant, and dynamic conversation about the intersections of sport and social justice. And it's a pretty big umbrella, and our different panelists tonight are going to help to unpack the different perspectives and experiences and what that can mean, particularly as we look to connect the local to the global. And so tonight we are lucky to have with us a variety of experts on the topic. First, Mariya Goodbrake, who is the founder and director of Global FC, a nonprofit organization based in Kansas City that supports refugee youth and families with the tools to overcome obstacles to success through the vehicle of soccer. Previously, she worked with international medical assistance in Mexico, coordinating medical projects to advance healthcare for the economically deprived Maya populations in the Yucatan Peninsula. Mariya, thank you so much for joining us. We also have with us tonight Dr. Ketra Armstrong, who is a professor of sport management, director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and director of the Center for Race and Ethnicity in Sport in the School of Kinesiology at the University of Michigan. She is a university diversity and social transformation professor, and also an affiliate faculty in the UM departments of Afro-American and African Studies, Women's and Gender Studies, and the Institute for Research on Women and Gender. Dr. Armstrong also serves as UM's NCAA faculty athletics representative. In addition, Dr. Armstrong is a former NCAA Division I scholarship student athlete as a basketball player, a coach in women's basketball, and athletic administrator. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Armstrong.
Absolutely.
And thrilled. And also tonight, we have Dr. Austin Boniga, who is the undergraduate program director of sports management and an assistant teaching professor at the University of Kansas. He also helps lead the Department of Health, Sport, and Exercise Sciences Name, Image, and Likeness certification. As an athlete, Dr. Boniga qualified for the 2020 and 2024 US Olympic trials in the marathon, represented Team USA at the 2019 Road 50K World Championships in Brasov, Romania. He also finished as national runner-up in the 2019 US Road 50K Championship. Former NCAA Division II cross-country track and field student athlete for the Pittsburgh State Gorillas, and a two-time NCAA cross-country national qualifier. So Dr. Austin, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're thrilled to have all three of you here. And so my remit tonight is more to facilitate the conversation and allow you guys to steal the spotlight, as it were. What I thought we would do is start off, each of you can kind of start off with some introductory remarks to talk a little bit about your work in this intersection, and then I will start posing the questions. So perhaps Dr. Armstrong, would you care to start off?
Sure. Thank you again for this opportunity. Any opportunity for me to talk about, social justice is something that I relish. I mean, I could be in a grocery store line. It doesn't matter. When the opportunity presents itself, I am there. So I'm delighted to have this platform. And I also want to say thank you to those in the audience who decided to spend a portion of their evening or morning, wherever you are in the world, with us. As you mentioned in the introduction, I'm a student. I'm a former student athlete, and I was a former coach. So this is a fun time for me because right in the throes of March Madness, I also played basketball, coached basketball. So it's a fun time. But it's really interesting because for me, being an advocate for social justice just came organic, and it's an authentic part of who I am. Being a black-faced woman hailing from the proud state of Mississippi, and Tupelo, Mississippi, particularly, I've had a lot of practice in my life of trying to understand up close and in person social injustice and social inequity. So I've made it my life's work to try to address the situation and to correct the distortions. Because to be honest, I didn't live my life decorated by my race. I was blessed. To be honest, athletics gave me privilege. It allowed me to get into spaces that I probably never would have. And so some of the injustices and the ills and inequities that many of my colleagues experience, I didn't experience in the same way because sport gave me privilege. And so as a scholar, that's what I write about, is sport. And I talk about race and gender, and I talk about leadership. And one of the things that I find so interesting is sport is such a great platform for having this discussion. Sport is that place where we get to see diversity, inclusion and harmony and the rhythm of justice. We get to see it play out in real time. And so I like to bring attention and help people to understand the social cognitive the social cultural game within the game of sports. And so I try to highlight, matters of race and how race is normalized in some places, how it's marginalized in others. I've done research for Black athletes, for example, to show how sometimes their race becomes privilege for them. But in the classroom, sometimes it becomes a way in which their identity becomes marginalized. So I try to help people in my research, in my scholarship, and in my service to just understand the nuances of race, but more so from an empowerment perspective. So many times when we talk about injustice and race, we talk about, discrimination and all of the ills. So what I try to do, because I live my life from a place of the glass is half full, I'm a positivist by nature. And so I try to help people to reimagine sport as a platform for social justice. And with my scholarship, again, with my service and with what I try to do for students, and in my role as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the school. And with my center, we're really trying to be a place where people can learn a little bit more about race from a social, cultural, cognitive domain, and looking at it beyond the scope and the realm of discrimination. So I'm looking at the social psychology of race, how it can be empowering, how it impacts our identity, how it impacts the sports we participate in, how it impacts the opportunities and experiences we get or we don't get based on the racial description that we often wear. So I'm excited to talk more about social justice, but particularly what I've spent my life in is really in a domain of race, but I live at the intersection of race and gender. So I also talk about gender, because for women of color, it's a quite different experience oftentimes because they're at the intersection of race and gender and class and ability and sexuality. And the list goes on with all of those identities. So essentially, and I'll wrap it up here, I'm an advocate, a staunch advocate for social justice. I try to do it in my scholarship and my service, and in my classes. And I will tell you, last thing I'll say, I teach a class, Leadership and Diversity in Sport. I teach race and gender in sport, and I am having way more fun than I know the law should allow, because I'm working with a generation of students who want to be agents of change. So I have the great fortune to try to lead them and guide them through this terrain of helping them to make the world a better place. So that's really my spiel, is that this is what I do, it's who I am, and it's what I'll try to share with you this evening. So thank you for the opportunity just to make some opening remarks to get to allow you to know me a little bit better. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful, and kind of sets the scene, as it were. And I look forward to kind of delving a little bit more deeply, both in our part of the Q&A, but then also for the audience. So please start thinking about your questions that you'd like to pose to each of our panelists. Next, in alphabetical order, we'll go to you, Dr. Austin Boniga.
Yeah, so can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. All right. So I am Dr. Austin Bogina. I'm the undergraduate program director of sport management and assistant teaching professor here at the University of Kansas. And so I was really excited to, obviously be kind of recruited to be on this panel. Obviously, definitely not in any way, shape, or form as qualified as several of my colleagues who are on this call, but I'm excited to ideally share some insights on what we do within our program. This isn't my area of research. However, we do try to be very much an advocate and a resource for our students to understand this intersection of social issues in sport, things that we are incorporating into our classes, trying to find different interdisciplinary opportunities to share these stories and instances like this. And so very excited to be here. Obviously very much excited to learn as well from our fellow panelists, but very much just thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And Mariya.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mariya Dostzadah Goodbrake. Thank you guys so much for having me and allowing my voice to be heard here. I'm absolutely passionate when, we talk about issues of social justice, human rights, religious freedom, all of that. You know what? The thing that I'm the most passionate about in my area of work is how do we give the tools for success for the next generation of youth who are really carrying the baton forward. I'm a human rights activist. I'm an executive director and founder for Global FC. I do cross-cultural trainings. I do all of that, but at heart, I'm a storyteller. My mission here in Kansas City truly is to give kids the absolute best opportunities to realize and pursue their greatest God-given purpose and potential. For me, the greatest passion in my life is the unleashing of human potential. And anything that stops the unleashing of human potential, especially for vulnerable and underserved kids, be it poverty or war or anything like that, that's my definition of injustice. I believe that every human being has the God-given right to pursue their greatest skills and assets to become thriving members of society. This is also a very personal mission for me. I am a refugee from Afghanistan. My family fled during the Soviet invasion. And like many of the children that I have the honor of serving here in Kansas City, I was born in displacement. I grew up in Iran. I was raised in India. My family was given hope and new opportunity in Canada, where I was raised. And then life took me to Mexico, and then I ended up in the strangest place I've ever been, this place called Kansas City, in the middle of America. And I got to come here. And, I always have recognized the power of sport. We all know that, the powerful quote by Nelson Mandela, the power of sport to break down walls, and it's the greatest vehicle that we have. I grew up as a girl that grew up in a very strict Muslim Afghan home where sports was not a privilege. It wasn't a right. It was something that we had to battle and to fight for. And my sisters and I were great athletes. And in a lot of ways, sports was an opportunity for us to get outside of the confines of the cultural and religious expectations of my parents, who were desperate to maintain and hold on to our identity from our background. And sports became this safe space for us just to be free and to be normal, like normal other kids. But I also knew how much we had to fight for that. I think at a very, very deeper level, as we kind of look into why sport is so important for social justice. And I use just a very personal experience. My sister at that time coming into Canada, 16 years old, disobeyed and was forced back to Afghanistan at 16 years old for arranged marriage. And so many times when I think about the work that we do through sport, I always wonder and ponder if the mentorship and what we try to provide for our kids here, if someone could have been a voice for my sister that could have changed her path. And she didn't have that. So that's something that we're trying to provide here, because ultimately, although we're giving these kids the opportunity to play sports here in Kansas City at the highest level, at the highest quality level, what we're really at the heart level is giving them a community of belonging. And that's what they are desperately seeking, more than just the opportunity to play. And that sense of community of belonging and all the resources that come from that. And ultimately, that was the heart and passion behind Global FC. Before I kind of came here to Kansas City, I was given the opportunity to do a project with the UN at the Zadari camp at the border of Syria and Jordan, holding the largest Syrian refugee population at that time there. And just seeing how little soccer nets and goals were giving these children the opportunity for normalcy to start their healing process. And so when I came here to Kansas City at the heart of America, where this is the heart of soccer, I was not interested in creating more advocacy or ministry or a nonprofit. It was simply, how can we use a meaningful and relevant and powerful tool for engagement to connect and to help use that to unleash these kids to become thriving members of society. That is the heartbeat of everything that we do here. And all of that does tie back to the global conversation around social injustice, because in this interconnected world that we live in, what we do at the local level does and will have global implications.
Great, thank you. Yeah, very much that interconnective tissue that I think sometimes gets lost when we can focus so much on a particular community and not always think that it is directly connected into the larger global one as well. And I look forward to pulling this apart a little bit more with all of you this evening. So kind of an icebreaker question for all of our panelists, as well as a note that I'm going to ask each of you to come up with one question for someone else on the panel during our time together. But, you know, if we could start off, it's a dense sporting year, and we're just 4 months away from the start of the Paris Games, the Olympics, and then the Paralympic Games. What are you most excited about this year in terms of how the realms of sport and social justice intersect at the international level?
You know, I will say, so I've worked the Olympics back in the dark ages. I actually was an employee for the Atlanta committee for the Olympic Games called ACOG back in '96. I had the great fortune of going to Cape Town years and years ago when they were bidding to host the Olympics. And I've actually gone to Ghana, and I conducted a training seminar for the Ghanaian Olympic Committee, because at that time, they didn't have sport management classes, you know, to understand the nuance of trying to manage this conglomerate of an enterprise. So I feel a special connection to the Olympics for those reasons, because I have been employed, I've done some training. But I tell you what excites me the most. It really is the stories. And I know one of my panel colleagues here says, you know, telling the stories. That's what it's all about. It's telling the stories, and it's helping people to peel back the layer of the athletes and to understand the humanity that lies within and beneath the uniform. That's what's most exciting. And to really see what they overcome, and the persistence and the perseverance. It's the stories. That's what I enjoy the most. And it gives us a chance to root for winners. And then people are winning in all kinds of ways. And it doesn't mean the person that gets the blue ribbon necessarily or the gold medal necessarily, but we get to see winners in very in a broad definition of what winning looks like. So I love the stories first and foremost, but I also like the subtle and profound ways in which the athletes are using their voice. Their voice, sometimes it can be a tattoo on their body. Their voice sometimes could be something very subtle placed on their uniform without violating uniform, guidelines. But then sometimes it's just a very, very expressive gesture that they need to communicate to the world. So I love the ways in which our athletes are very much participants in social justice. And I like how they're using their platform to this in this grandiose stage to tell the world that, yeah, and being an athlete is what I do, but it is not the entirety of who I am. And it shows I am human, I am woman, I am man, I am this, I am that. That is my story. So that's what I look forward to when I watch the Olympics. Plus, there's some few sports that I love. Like I love gymnastics, I love track and field. You know, those are actually my favorite because I love those. But it's the stories and it's the ways in which athletes communicate social justice in their own unique way.
Dr. Armstrong, that fired me up right there. I love that. I think the storytelling piece obviously is massive, but I love kind of just your close there on the I am piece, because that's something that I enjoy very much and I look forward to as well. We're really actually just talking about this in class, weirdly enough, on Tuesday, about kind of just that kind of jump from a fan, a spectator, just a person in the audience to the I am piece, the ability to really identify. As a runner, that's something that some of my research is really focused on, just being brave enough to say, I'm a runner, and finding a place within those communities. It's amazing. And obviously, from more of a participatory sport lens, I love the Olympics being able to obviously showcase some of those more non-traditional sports. It's, in Kansas City, we've got great resources on the, big time level, but it's nice to see, like you said, some of those stories that may have been hidden, that we don't get to hear. And especially with this kind of panel, hearing things from the local, regional, national, and global stage, I think to me, it's kind of that first step in kind of bringing some awareness. And then I think I'll be excited to see how much more turns into kind of that action component. How do we shift from just awareness to action? So very much looking forward to the upcoming games. Wish I was participating, but happy to watch now.
Yeah, for me, I mean, what other beautiful and powerful kind of microcosm where that the Olympics brings so many people together that might have even conflicting, viewpoints of one another, historical prejudices towards one another, to bring them in this realm through the power of sport. And I bring everything back down to story. I mean, I would say within our organization that serves kids from over 30 different nations, we have our treasure box of stories. And I remember someone once telling me stories are like treasures, catch them when they fall. And when I think about these environment of the Olympics, I sit there and I think, what other space do you have where not only can people share stories, even amongst groups and people that have those historically competing or even conflict within each other, be it religious, political, or cultural. But the thing that I'm more passionate about, just the sharing of stories, is that by doing that, especially bringing all these people unified through sport, is we get to discover the common human denominators. And that is what I think is incredible. I have seen so many examples of that in sports setting when I was in South Korea for the Paralympics, where a Christian person and a Muslim person, completely different cultures, different experiences, different sports, but then they speak and share their stories and they're united through their universal roles as mothers or sisters or this. And the power is that when you share those two different stories, you actually build a third story, and the power of that third story is nobody owns it. And that's where reconciliation and peace and justice exists. And I think that what other experience do we have where we can bring all of those people together? And yes, then there are, things that happen within those sharings that it changes people's hearts. But then as we're watching the sports on the news and everything, some of those stories get unleashed and it gets to inspire the public as well. And it goes more than just a sport and competition, but it combines the human experience to make it meaningful. And what other amazing and beautiful opportunity do we have through, especially the Olympics?
Right. And, it's very much this common language of sport, right? that can cut through so much and really build those bridges in a way unlike most other sorts of prisms that we have. And, you know, speaking of languages and the power of sports, Dr. Boniga, I wanted to kind of give this one to you to kick us off, because one of the things that speaks so powerfully through the language of sports to, I think, the vast majority of people around the world is the athlete story, the athlete voice. And you know, you serve in a unique position, being, you know, both a scholar and a practitioner in sport. From your experience, how can athletes use their voice or their platforms for social change, both in their local communities, but also within these international forums, particularly keeping in mind that, you know, not every culture has the same sort of tradition of athlete advocacy for social justice in quite the same way that we might be a little bit more used to in the US. And kind of piggybacking on that, what are some of the opportunities, but also challenges from an athlete's perspective in doing so?
Perfect. All right. I'm going to try to break this down. Let me know if I'm forgetting one of those questions. Okay, starting things off, you know, I kind of reflecting on that, I think something we talk a lot about is kind of where those stories begin. And, you know, right now we're very blessed with strong social media presence. There's a lot more outlets, you know, traditional, new, digital, a lot more kind of ways to get a voice out. And so what's really, for me, kind of where we start that conversation is kind of who, you know, in sport, what are those moments that kind of remind you of those. And so, you know, some in a running scene, you know, we think about, you know, Tommy Smith and John Carlos. You know, that's a very powerful moment when we think about these kind of things. We think about Catherine Schweitzer with Boston Marathon and situations like that, where that brought attention. And what's, to me, some of the interesting parts about those fighting for those causes was that it's kind of a still image. We've, you know, for the most part, sometimes it's just that image. We don't really dive much deeper than what that image shows, what that picture shows. Whereas now, I think we're seeing a lot more student athletes, a lot more now, who are wanting to have their voices heard. Then not only are they wanting to have their voices heard, but they're recognizing that that may not be for everyone, which I've been very fascinated by, where you're seeing athletes understanding that there are very niche audiences out there where whether it's more of a local, you're kind of talking from that local cause where they are, I think, more knowledgeable that this isn't something for everyone. This is something more targeted towards our local community. This is something more regionally based versus trying to take it on at a national or global level. And so I've been really fascinated by that component in terms, and it does make me wonder if that is something that is strategic from college athletic departments, recognizing like that's something that we need to have that conversation, because in my experience and my research on more of the professional scene, that's not something that really happens a lot. Actually, from a lot of runners, they talk that they would love more education on kind of, you know, how to navigate, whether it's just these spaces where, because they do feel this, you know, they're themselves, they're competing, but a lot of, you know, colleagues and friends who are in running, you know, they have sponsors and brands that also have their own ideas and goals and purpose that they serve. And so to me, there's that lack of education, but also kind of that lack of communication on how do we proceed in this space? How do we navigate this? How do I get to stay true to who I am? But then, you know, also represents maybe a broader audience and really push some of these instances. And so that's really, for me, I think kind of where we begin kind of those stories and kind of navigating the community, regional, national, global stage. And then kind of remind me again, what was kind of the second part?
What are the opportunities, but also the challenges for athletes who, you know, from their perspective in deciding how and in what ways to add their voice?
Yeah, I think similar. I think they just don't understand they don't know how much it's going to make a difference, or even just kind of what the right channels to go through is. I think sometimes we think of it as this something that we can have this. To me, we want everyone to be invested in this issue or this topic or this situation, and you know, that's a lot. That's a lot to ask. I think, you know, not to pick on running, but that is very much what I know best. And I love, you go to road races, and it used to be I'd go and I'd run the race and I'd, you know, hit the road and I'd be on my way. But now I make it a point to stay out there and I watch. I try to stick around quite a while, and I start seeing individuals, and I see them in their singlets and they're running for different causes and to bring awareness to different issues that I may not have known, maybe close to their local community. If they're a Texas runner who's competing at the New York Marathon, or they're in California going to here in Kansas City, it's very unique and interesting to see how all these different causes and even the races and different events that are supporting causes. And sometimes it can be overwhelming because we're seeing audiences who want to support everything, and they want to be invested in everything. They want to know everything. And that's a lot to ask from our audience too. And so for me, I would love to see events, and those of us who are trying to share our voices, maybe be a little more strategic and know like what's kind of the big piece here. And so that's something that I would say. So.
And lastly, while I still have you in the hot seat, from the athlete perspective, is there, I think so many of us in the general audience, we have this impression that when athletes do use their voice for social justice issues and to promote positive social change, there's a very well-defined, well-thought-out strategy. Is there something that we might be surprised to learn when it comes to how athletes determine if, how, or when to use their voice in these issues?
Well, I kind of took my own kind of words there. So jumping ahead. So like I said, I think for me, the surprising kind of that aha moment, especially in my research, was just to me, I wasn't expecting the college scene to be kind of ahead of the game versus kind of the pro scene. At least kind of, again, where I exist within the participatory sport. That was something that the absence, the just questions surrounding and not really even having the resources to know where to go to. For instance, a lot of people in running, they may or may not have a coach. They may or may not have a team. You have unattached, so you don't have those resources. And so I was surprised by that. And you're going to see people at the Olympic Games who are in the same boat. They've gotten themselves there. They don't have those resources. And so I think I'll be curious to kind of look and see, which athletes kind of maybe demonstrate some of those characteristics where they understand how to best share their voice and how to go about it, or maybe they don't feel the pressure to tread lightly on certain subjects because they, something that I don't really talk much about is, I think, kind of navigating more of even just the authenticity of partnerships and who you have supporting you. That's something that's in participatory sports. A lot of times you'll see it's a 1-year renewable contract. You're not seeing a big time quarterback contract that's a lifetime contract for millions and millions of dollars. That's just not happening. A lot of times even your top level Olympians, you're going to see who they might be wearing Nike and have a pretty strong support system, or Adidas, not, go down the list, Hoka. And by next year they're with somebody else. And so for whatever reason, to me, I think those are interesting components that we don't always take into account when we're seeing who's sharing these voices. And I think sometimes it's, who's in their corner. And that's something that I've been much more intentional about, going to find those stories and see, is this somebody who's, you can tell there's been that investment in over the years and they feel trusted and they know they kind of have that support there? Or is it somebody who's trying to survive and advance, which I think does bring up a whole nother, probably different panel, but something that I'm very conscious of.
Great, thank you. And on a slightly different strain of this line of discussion, Dr. Armstrong, I wanted to know, in your experience, how do you define success in terms of when an athlete or a sports person uses their voice or their platforms for social justice issues, or to try to make a positive social change in their communities? What are some of the key ingredients in this recipe?
That's a great question. I won't get this right, and it just made me think of something. There's a Ethiopian proverb or something. It says, success or failure is in the hands of the gods or something, but we celebrate the try, right? It's something to that nature. So from my perspective, success is the try. It should not be defined by what's good or what's bad, because what's good and what's bad is relative, and it depends on who you're asking what's good and what's bad. Oftentimes, if you think about, early on with Tommy Smith and John Carlos, they were vilified early on when they made those expressions during the Olympics in 1968. they were criticized, ostracized, and the list goes on of the maltreatment that they received. Because at that time, the culture perceived it to be bad. They weren't ready for that type of expression so boldly in such a global platform. And they suffered mightily in many regards. But times have changed and the social cultural consciousness of the world has changed. Now they're celebrated. They're speaking all over the places. They have statues. So now if you were to ask, people will say, wow, that was winning. That was winning when they did it. It just took us a long time to realize that the game was still going on. They were playing the game before it was cool to play the game. They were risking things to risk when it wasn't the cachet thing to do. So if you were to have asked that question then, they would have said, wow, that's not winning. How dare you bring politics into sport, this thing we love, this cathartic release, this place we go to have fun and forget about the world. How dare you bring the racism and the poverty and all the things that America is suffering? How dare you bring that to this stage of sports? So if you'd asked them then, that wasn't winning. That wasn't successful. But we know now that it very much was successful. And so the athletes who are coming now are standing on their shoulders. They're standing on the shoulders of what they did. So from my perspective, there are no winners and losers necessarily, because from my perspective, I celebrate the try. I celebrate the courage that it takes to try to speak out, to use your voice, to use your platform. But I will tell you that it does come at a great risk. Even the athletes that I work with today, many of them, now I will tell you, the athletes have also realized the agency that they have. They realize that if they don't participate, we don't need coaches, we don't need administrators, we don't need media. So they're starting to realize their power and their agency. And whereas there was a time that they would be very careful in how they exert their agency, it's worth it to them now. And so even with some of the NIL deals, some of them are negotiating social justice types of activities as a part of their platform. And so when you talk about winning and losing and success and failure, it's relative. It's also situational. It also depends on the generation, because there's some old school, in my class we talk about old school and new school people who are involved in sport. There's some old schoolers that, hey, there's no room for that. But the new school ballers and the contemporary people who said, this is my social consciousness, and I don't check my racial identity at the door of the locker room so that you think I come in as a sanitized, racialized being. For those people, the try is winning. And so that's what I like. That's a great question. I've never been asked that question before ever. So I appreciate you asking that, but that's how I see it. It's the try that we celebrate, right? It's the try that we celebrate.
Well, and I love how you phrase that, because that really kind of gets into it's speaking of your favorite sporting events, the Olympics, right? I think often lost in the conversation about the Olympics or some of these other major sporting events that we consume as fans or as spectators, is that it's actually about the performance and not necessarily always the win or lose. And so I love how you phrase that, the try, and that really kind of speaks to the performance level. And that performance and what goes into it, that brings up a part of a different thread of this conversation. And I'd like to turn to Director Goodbrake for this. Performance is possible through a variety of different things, but also mentorship, and the power of mentorship is something that can often get overlooked in the equation of figuring out the try or the performance. And so I'm really curious to hear from you in terms of your experience, how mentoring can play a role in empowering refugee youth, and how this isn't just an investment in one individual, but in a community as a whole.
Yeah. We've got amazing mentorship organizations in Kansas City and across this country that work with different pockets of ethnicities or whatnot. It's specifically a little bit more challenging when you can really penetrate deep mentorship in the heart of the refugee immigrant community because of the social and because of the religious and cultural barriers. Right? A lot of people don't know how to walk through that. And so there is this population of kids that come here who don't get to experience that deep mentorship here. And sport becomes this place that we have that because it gives us an opportunity for us to engage. But when I think about mentorship, is woven into everything that we do. Relationships is woven into every single thing that we do. If you're a coach, you're a mentor. If you're a volunteer within our organization at whatever capacity, if you're a driver, you're a mentor. But we have to, when looking at specifically at the refugee immigrant population, we can't look at and using sport as that vehicle to do that. We can't look at mentorship through the Western perspective, which is that individualistic perspective of mentorship is. We need to meet them at a worldview and identity level. Our kids come from a tribal, collective, communal sense of identity. Example, as a woman from Afghanistan, I cannot understand my identity apart from the clan, apart from the rest, right? And so for us, we had to meet these kids in terms of mentorship and sport through that collective nature, which not only means that we use sport as an opportunity to mentor and engage the kids, but it's very critical that we use that as an opportunity to engage the larger ethnic group. Because if we don't have the credibility and the trust within the Sudanese community, the Congolese community, the Kenyan community, the Iranian community, then they will not entrust their children in our care. They will not entrust their children to be within the sport that we are offering. And that's why that type of mentorship is so impactful, because it's not just impactful for that child through this vehicle of soccer, it also is impactful for that ethnic community right here in Kansas City that might only stay within the realm of their own people. And then it builds that trust and opens up their cultural door within the segregated community right here in Kansas City to welcome Americans to come into their kind of pockets. And I think that's really, really important that we establish that type of credibility through mentorship. Because, you know, when I first came here, I grew up playing basketball. That's my heart sport. I run the largest refugee immigrant soccer program in the city, and I still don't know anything about soccer. But I know that soccer is not just a sport for these kids. It's part of their cultural identity. And it's not about the sport. For me, everything is about finding and using a relevant and meaningful and credible tool. And so as come to proximity with the refugee population, and our mission really is to use sport for mentorship and to a larger degree social justice and whatnot, is how does this mentorship has to produce credibility? And we come back to your previous question about voice. If these mentorships do not produce credibility, then it becomes almost aimless, because only through credibility do we have then the platform to speak without fear. And when we speak, we can speak about social justice issues because you now have a credible voice. And I think that as we think about, you know, athletes and having that voice, it's about how do you continue to have a consistent message as an athlete, but making sure that that message is credible, that doesn't matter where you go, that you can have that place where you can speak without fear, even if you're going to a community that might not necessarily accept your message. So that's really, really important when we think about what mentorship looks like working specifically with this population. We have to start thinking about more of their cultural identity, their worldview, and we cannot look at mentorship and sport through a Western and individualistic perspective.
Mm. And just staying on your work with Global FC a little bit, in terms of how soccer, football, serves as a bridge across divides within the different refugee communities represented in Kansas City. You know, how does that work in terms of serving kind of almost as a intra-Kansas City diplomatic tool? And what does it mean for Kansas City overall when thinking about how this connects both to the local city, but also how it will be connecting to the international, particularly ahead of hosting parts of FIFA 2026?
Yeah, I absolutely love that question. For us, one of the other objectives that we kind of have is the divide. Let's talk about the divide. As much as we're here to use soccer and sport as a vehicle to empower and to lift and to guide these kids into realizing the greatest potential, we also have an obligation. For me, everything is how can we have a generational solution? And that's not just about focusing on this pocket of kids. We have to find ways to bridge the refugee immigrant kids with American-born kids. because we need to make sure that we're breaking down those walls of misunderstanding, fear, misconceptions, so that they can introduce a new positive and peaceful narrative of tolerance and respect for one another. So on a Saturday or Sunday, when our kids are out in a field at Olathe Soccer Complex here, everybody else looks at it and sees a sports, that hour and a half, a game happening. What we see is that divide, kids that might be in completely different socioeconomic, different parts of the city, where the sport is bringing them together. And it doesn't matter if one kid had to be dropped off by a volunteer, or one kid is being dropped off by a Lincoln, or one lives in a big house or lives in the underserved community. If one is what cultural or religious difference they are, in that moment, soccer becomes a powerful equalizer, where the only thing that matters, all of those divides go away, is who gets that ball in that net. And I think that that's such a powerful time, and that moment, we get the opportunity then to educate those American-born parents who might not know who these refugee kids are, right here in Kansas City, just 20 minutes away from where they live. And that's really important for kind of what we do in terms of bringing those divides together as well, and just breaking down. And that's the thing that soccer gets to do here for us right here in Kansas City.
Thank you. That helps to illuminate exactly that nexus a little bit more. I'm going to ask the next question to Dr. Armstrong, kind of pulling on another thread, but giving all of our panelists a heads up that after this question, I'm going to ask you for your, one question for each other. So Dr. Armstrong, thinking of how overcoming divides and overcoming divisions, including in terms of identity, whether it's race, gender, other identities that, oftentimes we wear more than one at the same time. How can we, the public or the general public, help sports people in better connecting their efforts in the social justice arena? There's a lot that obviously goes into an athlete's voice and platform, but what can we, the general public, do to help facilitate that in any way, shape, or form?
I think there one thing is to realize, from my perspective, is that we say sport is a microcosm, of society. Sport reflects society. It is reflected by society. Sociologists talk about that a lot. It is so true. If you think about it fundamentally in sport, if it's a team sport, you have different people who are working together. All right, they can be different regardless of their religious ideology, their demographic, their demography. None of those things matter, because it's not the color of the skin, but it's the color of the uniform. If they're on my team, then that's what's important. And so what we see with sport is teamwork. And so, and I've talked about this in my center. We've talked about using sport as a tool for social justice. And one of the things that I try to impress upon the general public, even with my scholarship, is that sport gives us a laboratory and a platform to look at life. And so we get to see what teamwork can look like if we just focus on the common goal and not the individuality that's comprising to try to work together to complete the goal. But we also see in sport the whole notion that we need difference. If everyone on the sport team played the same position, were the same height, it wouldn't work. We need differences, and that's the beauty of sport. You got, look, one of my favorite sports, basketball. You gotta have guards. You gotta have posts. You gotta have center. If we had a team of all guards versus a team that had a diverse mix of players, more than likely the team with the diverse mix of players is probably going to be more successful. So sport just illustrates all of these things that people do beyond sport. When you go to work, we work with people who don't think like us, who don't look like us, but we're asked to work with them to achieve the company's goal. Sport shows us that in real time. When we're in sport, we learn how to fail, and oftentimes we have to make sense of defeat. In life beyond sport, sometimes we lose, and I use the term lose loosely, because I've already mentioned to you before, I think winning and losing is very contextual and very, very relative. But what I try to impress upon people is, in so many ways, each of them in their own way, they model what athletes do. They're part of a team oftentimes. Sometimes they're in the in group. Sometimes they're on the home team, but sometimes they're on the away team. Depending on their culture or their identity, they can be a part of the out group or the away team. And so I try to show the parallels, that the ways in which sport reflects society, and the way in which sport becomes this platform for us to see society at its best, right? Because we get to see winning, we get to see hard work, we get to see determination, we get to see people setting goals and maybe trying to navigate and do some things differently to reach those goals. That's what people do in real life. So I try to help them to see the parallels of what life is like beyond sport and what life is like within sport. And lastly, I think the thing that has served me well is the lessons that I've learned in sports have profoundly impacted my life. I know that my leadership is a function of me having to take a leadership role as an athlete and as a coach. I know that my willingness, my strategic way of approaching problems, I know that's because we had to have game plans as a coach and as an athlete. So I have game plans for my life. So there's not a doubt in my mind that what I've learned in sport has had a profound impact on elevating my life as a person. And so I try to show those parallels. And in fact, it's one of the reasons that many of the very well-paid, I would say well-compensated motivational speakers and people who go into the business and the consultants, they're oftentimes former coaches or former athletes, because people are trying to say, hey, how do I bring that into my organization? How can you make my organization win? And then we see it with personal branding. How do you help me win to be the best version of my highest self? And so my point in answer to your question is, there's a lot that the general public can do. The general public is what sport is. I just try to remind them of those parallels. I just try to show them where their lives intersect with the lives of the athletes. And what I find is it gives them a whole new motivation to understand what winning looks like in their lives. And that's the parallel. And that's how the general public can help, is to support the causes. Last thing I'll say, I think I said that before, but I promise this is the last thing. When Billie Jean King was playing against Bobby Riggs in the tennis, the battle of the sexes, even women, and so those of you who don't know, Billie Jean beat him. She won the tennis match. It not only promoted a revolution in sport, but Billie Jean had girls and women all over the country saying, I am woman, hear me roar. They were being active. They were engaging, not just in tennis, but they felt a sense of empowerment. They saw that in sport. So my point to you is sport showcases what's possible in the world beyond sport. And I try to help people make those connections and to see those parallels.
Can I throw in one thing? I love when you said how everybody plays different positions and whatnot. That reminded me when the very first team that we started here were 18 boys in one team from 12 different countries. And these were all kids who just came to America, don't speak English, so they don't have even that as a commonality. They all speak their different languages. And I remember Kansas City Star reporter coming out to our game, and he asked one of our boys, his name was River, from Thailand, and he goes to the translator, he goes, how do you guys communicate on the field? And River looks at this guy and as like very easily goes, we speak with our feet. And I just remember like that always stuck with me, just like you've got kids who have come from competing cultures, religions, don't even speak the English as the commonality, speak complete different languages, but somehow they're able to find that unifying thing, and it's our feet can speak. And it's just, it's a beautiful thing. Sorry, I just remember that from what you were saying about that. I was like, oh yeah, it's very much true.
Well, it's so spot on and such an apt illustration of exactly what we're talking about here. But I also think that's a great team slogan, by the way. So I'd love to open it up to have first our panelists ask a question of each other. Does anyone want to take the mic first?
You asked such great questions. I'm trying to think of what's left. What's left for us to ask?
You know, I'd like to kind of, I know that we've touched on a lot of things, but let's talk about the fact that the world is going to come here to Kansas City, the FIFA, right? I'd love to bring it back to that. Is how do you think that Kansas City in what we do not only best prepared, not just for a historical sporting event, but to give a message to the world. And I think that when what is not just what is our message, and also, you know, what is our responsibility for that historical event to the world.
You know, not being, I think I've been to Kansas City a couple times. Wait, does Kansas City have the Jazz Museum?
Yes.
And right next door to the Negro Baseball League?
Yes.
I love that place. So I'm there. Give me tickets. Okay, give me tickets. This is, you know, one of the things that I think back in the day when I worked at the Olympics in Atlanta, we talked a lot about legacy. We talked a lot about leaving a cultural legacy so that there's a life and an impact of the Olympics way beyond the games. So there was the Central Park, and there's some other things. Some of the historically Black colleges located in Atlanta hugely had a huge benefit from the Olympics being in Atlanta, because it really provided upgrades for their facilities. So I would say, for those who are in Kansas, the residents in particular, what is going to be the legacy? More importantly, what do you want the legacy to be? We know that in some places the Olympics has come in, created displacement, and the legacy wasn't something that people were proud of. So my question is, I think out loud, what would the legacy be that would be a fair representation of what you want the world to think of Kansas City? Because I think when we talk about all these things, the games, it's the legacy that's left behind and the impact that will live long after the games are over.
I love that you said that, because, you know, we sit there and we go, well, we want the world to see that Kansas City is a world-class place, that the world can come here and we can provide a phenomenal and excellent experience through the power of sport. So what we're saying is the world, the nations are coming to our Kansas City doorstep. And that's a whole beautiful thing. What is the legacy we leave? What is the representation that we give to the world? But then let's take it back to the global perspective of something. I'm going to tie it back to this. So we are experiencing the greatest displacement of human beings in the history of mankind happening in our generation today. We have to let that sink in. That is the greatest displacement of human beings that have ever walked on planet Earth happening in our lifetime. So when I think about our responsibility as in Kansas City being an official welcoming city, what we're trying to say is the nations, the world, in the form of refugees and asylums and evacuees, are coming to our doorsteps. So I kind of bring it back to the FIFA. So if we're sitting there and wanting to be like, what is the best way that we can be a welcoming city to these athletes and to the FIFA organization, and what's their legacy? And we do that because of sport. What is our human obligation when that it doesn't come in the form of sports, but they come in the form of refugees and asylums and stuff? We should be as much of a welcoming city, and to provide the best experience as new Americans here. So I feel like in some ways that is a huge event with the FIFA and what we're trying to do. But when we look past the sport and everything, let's then use that as a legacy and the momentum to have that same spirit for the global phenomenal crisis that we're dealing with. And we get pieces of that right here in Kansas City.
Yeah, I would also add first with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. That was a fantastic shout out there, because Bob Kendrick and Kiana Sinks are incredible. They are just phenomenal representatives of Kansas City advocates. And so love that was a shout out there. And so really, I think too, coming at this from much more of like I guess an organizational leadership side, you know, a lot of times we see these big events and it's exciting. And I think Kansas City is a lot of things to a lot of people. And everybody kind of has this idea of what Kansas City is. And my hope is that you see some of these leaders kind of in Kansas City who have those voices, have those platforms. I would love to see them come together and really kind of have this unified plan. Maybe it is kind of phases, maybe it is more goals of what they want to accomplish, but there's so many great things. Even just, you know, you get off the airport, brand new airport, you know, what's there? What's kind of that welcome to KC from the moment you get on the airport? They're going to be taking the streetcar, phenomenal resource, you know, for, you know, just public transportation. That's a big piece, you know, barbecue. I mean, there's all those kind of components that I think sometimes are the fun ones we want to talk about. And so I am hopeful that, similar to what Director Goodbrake, what you're kind of talking about, just kind of with some more of these social issues and things that we're doing well in Kansas City, my hope is that they don't get swallowed up and completely overshadowed by some of, again, more of the exciting and more, maybe well-known things Kansas City prides itself on, which, again, I think there's a way to balance it, but I think that needs to be a conversation that we really need to start now. We don't want to wait until right before, and it's not something planned out. It does need to be something that we rehearse and we're kind of all understanding of where we're going.
Well, I know the FIFA has had part of Kansas City. They have the legacy teams, the human rights pillar, and we have the community pillars and all of that. But I think that one of the things that I'm very proud of Kansas City is that we do have a spirit of collaboration in the city. And I think that even at a higher level, we do have that opportunity, especially with the FIFA festivities coming.
And this is when I get to step in and mention a lot of this involves sports diplomacy, right? Both within the Kansas City community, but also how you're engaging and welcoming the world. So it's a really vital question, and I can't wait to see how that develops, and using the prism of FIFA 2026 into all these other aspects for sure. Another question from the panel.
I just thought of a question. One of the things that I often struggle with sometimes is I believe in, so we talk to athletes and we talk to people in sport to try to bring their authentic selves, to the games, to the events. Part of some people, part of their authenticity is the way in which they celebrate. And so to have athletes to accomplish such huge feats and yet expect them to curtail their emotions in the spirit of sportsmanship, it's almost seemed like at times there's a cultural censor. So there's cultural censoring to some athletes and how they express their exuberance. And if it looks too much, if it's too cultural, if it's too much flair, if it's too much like one cultural group or the other, it's unsportsmanlike. Is it an injustice to curtail and to try to sanitize the cultural freedom of athlete expression? Is that an injustice to the athletes in the spirit of sport and social justice? What are your thoughts?
We have this little Congolese 10-year-old boy, Sostine, new to the US. We put him on a team. And he's, it's about a half American-born kids and the rest immigrant refugee kids in one of our teams. And this little kid, he's a rock star. Oh my gosh, he's quite the soccer player. And every time he wins, and they're just winning every game, he does backflips across the field, because that is his expression. That in his African culture there, that he back home, they love to dance and everything. And some of the other parents and everyone look at that as unsportsmanlike, as arrogant, as that. And we're just giving this kid a place where he can express himself from his cultural background, and also keeping in mind that with all the stressors and the trauma and everything and the journey to get here to America, with everything that he's experienced, this little field and this space gives him an opportunity to just be a kid and have normalcy. And then when he gets a piece of joy, letting him express that in the way he wants, that's an act of healing. That's an act of joy. And that's why our tagline is hope in play, and is let him be free, and so our coaches are like, should we stop him from doing that because of I'm like, let him be.
Yes, I love it, because I agree. And I think that too many times the establishment is trying to protect the institutional image, which oftentimes is racist, sexist, misogynist, xenophobic, and the list goes on. And they're afraid of the cultural freedom that oftentimes sport brings out. Their cultures that dance when they're happy. That's just what they do, and whatever those expressions are, but oftentimes it's viewed as not unsportsmanlike, anti-establishment. And so they are sanctioned. And I was just wondering, do you think that's a form of social injustice to these particular athletes? So thank you for your response.
I'll always respond with a story.
I will ask a question. I am, I think I've kind of talked about it before. It's very easy. For my students, I always want to talk about the big sports. It's nice. But coming from Southeast Kansas, it was something that for me, the community, the grassroots level is so important, and the education we're having there. And so really for anyone on the panel, I would just be curious kind of from how you're seeing maybe even just the impact. We talk about, in sport, everybody's kind of equal, but I think we all know it's not, whether the resources, the opportunities you had to have in the ballpark right down the block versus all the way across the city. How, when I aerial view locations, I look to see how many tracks are, in the vicinity. And then I usually look up to see, are those tracks publicly accessible? Are they locked up? During what hours can the community access those? I try to look at those kind of things. And I think in this arms race that sport is seeing, money, and, it's who has the best uniforms, who has the most, resources, those kind of things. Are you seeing, what more can we do, to kind of bridge that gap and maybe bring back and maybe emphasize the community sport? Because I think the further we get away into, traveling ball definitely has its place. Your Premier Leagues, those are great. But how do we bring the conversation back to communities? Because I think with some of these social issues, getting, being out on the field with each other, maybe that is more, maybe not quite as competitive of a team, but how do we bring that back, or how do we get that conversation maybe trending back in that direction where we don't have athletes who are just going the traveling ball route? They are investing time into their, fellow, community members who may not be quite as good, but they understand if they're not there, they might have a team. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure exactly what the silver bullet would be to bring it back to the community level, but I will tell you that is where it is sorely needed, because that's the place that, even as you mentioned, the travel balls, they all have their place, but that's where we've missed the joy of just playing. Everybody has to win at all costs, at every cost. And so, like there was a time when kids could participate in multiple sports. Now they're required to specialize in one, because that's the one that's going to get them a scholarship that makes them the NIL money. Now is another piece of it. And so I do think that we have lost the innocence of amateurism, truly, and somehow we have to bring it back to amateur sports. I really think a lot of it is when we focus on just wide participation sports, those team sports that aren't so elitist, because we know some of the sports, that require money, they're very segregational sports because there's only a certain group of people that can play them. So I still am a proponent of sport for the masses. One of the things we did when I went to South Africa years ago was just trying to promote sport for everyone. And it was just a round thing. It used to be a soccer ball, I think, at one point, but then it just turned into this round thing. And they used it for basketball, they use it for soccer, they use it for kickball. But it was just a way of bringing the masses together to enjoy play. And that's what I think is missing. I think we need to get back to the fundamental purpose of play. We've gotten into winning is a difference, right? And so if we can somehow get back to elevating play, the power of play, the purpose of play, I think those are the ways in which we can infuse something special in community sports that in my idealistic world, I think can somehow trickle up. And honestly, I'm not sure, because the institution supports the haves having and the have-nots having not. But in answer to your question, what I would suggest is we got to elevate and celebrate the power and the purpose of play. And that begins at the community level. And if we can somehow build on that, then I think we're off to a good start. But it's kind of hard to unring this bell that we're in of professionalizing amateur sports. We look at college sports, it's just depending on the sport, revenue sports in particular, it's just a different version of a minor league, right? And so if somehow we can close that gap between community sports, celebrating the power and the purpose of play before they become sport as a business, sport as a job, then I think we're on the right track. So I don't think I've answered your question. I just agree with you that we should. And I think the way that we could is to celebrate and elevate the power and the purpose of play. That's all I got.
I love that. I mean, I'll keep bringing back. Our tagline is hope in play, hope in play. And our mission was never, ever to, we're going to combat the pay-to-play model, we're going to do that. Our whole mission was, what tool can we use for engagement that will allow us for deep mentorship, that as the world comes here, we can, in the form of those underserved kids, give them the tools so that we can unleash them back into Kansas City and they can become thriving members of society, and look at our mission not from a needs assessment, from an asset base, which is, if we unleash them back, their economy benefits, the social fabric of America benefits. I say all that, but by accident, we became the biggest force against a pay-to-play model in the city. This is by accident. But that being said, how does that transform to community as well? Is then as these kids go out into those fields in suburbia and everything outside their community, once they're, for games, they're coming into proximity that from with other communities. And we talked about the disparity or whatnot, but then it also gives an invitation to others to come into the heart of the underserved community. And what I have seen, which has been beautiful, is coaches who have been coaches for youth soccer for 20, 30 years and lost the passion and love of the game. They were just worn down. They saw it was a money grab. They saw all of that stuff. And then they come into this community and see these kids that it's not an extracurricular sport. It's part of their identity. They are just, and it's like they fall in love with the sport of the coaches as adults for the first time all over again. They regain the passion because they're seeing such authentic passion in these kids and the way they are. And so I've seen adult coaches and volunteers and people regain that sense of play as adults, not just as children, but as adults. And as they're coming back in here, I've gotten emails where our kids have kicked butt of a team 15-0, and I get an email from the parents of the opposing team, and I'm thinking, oh, here we go. I'm going to get a nasty email about, are they the too low of a division or whatnot? And I get emails from the mom saying, at one point I was cheering on your team, even though my son was like, she goes, I have never seen such passion and joy from these African kids, just cartwheeling and it wasn't, again, arrogance. It was their expression of their culture in the most beautiful moment of play, not competition, but play. And how then their performance or their play was inspiring even parents on the opposing team. And these are the things, the ripple effects, that when you can have the heart of why this is there, and it's not just about competition or we're going to fight against a pay-to-play model, it's just cultivating the space of play for these kids. And so I'm just kind of restating what you're saying again. And then how it doesn't just affect the kids and the sport, but even adults and people from across the city who are watching.
No, for sure. And, again, it gets back into the joy, the passion, and the power of the connectivity that all of this brings forth in all of us. So thank you all to each and every one of our panelists. This has been a very engaged, dynamic conversation that we've touched on, I think, so many different levels. And I appreciate your expertise and perspectives in helping us to better understand some of these intersections and what it means, and getting back to the performance and the ways that sports can serve as an equalizer as well. I thank you. I thank our audience as well. And I am going to pass the mic back over to Evan to close us out.
Well, thank you so much, each and every one of you for being involved, and to you, Dr. Krasnoff, for your expert moderation, taking us through this very capacious topic so responsibly and well done. It means a lot to each of you for joining us and sharing your expertise, as well as the audience who joined as well. And again, this program was recorded, so I'll be providing you that link to the recording tomorrow morning. So please review, please share with people who you feel interested in this discussion. I'm sure there will be many of you out there, and I hope you will, if you're here local in Kansas City, you'll join us for our final edition program in the Sports and Diplomacy series, Global Goals. The last program will focus on sports and soft power. It's going to be on Wednesday, April 3rd at HJ's Youth and Community Center here in Kansas City. This panel discussion will be centered around the way in which sports have and continue to act as a tool for cities and nations to exercise their geopolitical aims in the past, present, and future. and as well as the way in which sporting successes and large-scale sporting events have acted as a tool to propel the growth of Kansas City within the last 5 to 10 years. So we hope you will join us for that, and please enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Stinson and Ball Stars, for their support of this series. And we'll see you next week. Good night, everyone.